Let's bring up next storyteller, Kristen.
I recently visited my grandmother. As we sat at the dining table, the news blared from the TV nearby, a story about undocumented immigration and the refugee crisis. She sighed and told me, "I have no problem with immigrants as long as they do it legally. Why can't people just do it the right way?" I began to explain how I knew firsthand just how tricky the right way can be. So, in case you haven't noticed, I'm white. I'm American. I was born in Pennsylvania coal country. I was taught how to fire a gun. I have a face that's been described as wholesome. I pay my taxes. I am a Republican marketing team's wet dream, except for one thing. I was once an undocumented immigrant. For years, conservatives have been telling us that undocumented immigrants are taking over and should be deported immediately. It doesn't seem to matter that undocumented immigration has actually been flat in the US since 2009. It's the perception of the issue that matters. And perception is what allowed me to remain an undocumented immigrant for years. This is a story of great privilege. For starters, I went to college. During that time, I studied abroad in Spain for a summer. It was the first time anyone in my working class family had been to Europe, even for a visit, since my great-grandparents had immigrated from Europe 75 years before. It would be difficult to overstate how naive I was when I got there, but travel cracks your brain open in 1,000 indescribable ways. I spent some time in Madrid, and it was like an arrow through my heart. I knew I had to live there. Immediately after graduating, I moved to Madrid with a paid internship that secured me a short-term visa. It felt like home immediately. I shared a ramshackle apartment with a rotating cast of fellow foreigners, and then once again, I was lucky and privileged. I got a job editing a monthly city guide similar to the Rader. They offered to sponsor my work visa so that I could apply for Spanish residency. I was thrilled. I could make long-term plans to stay in Madrid. I was told that getting my legal residency was a process that could take more than a year. My employer and I had to fill out countless forms, and then a few times a month, I had to spend about 6 hours a day waiting in line for someone to stamp those forms. I was almost always the only American there. My line waiting peers were Romanian, Dominican, Moroccan, Sudanese, Chinese, Russian, people of every stripe going through the lengthy and tedious process of moving to a new country. Some immigrated for jobs, some for love, some to retire, and some as a last resort, escaping dire circumstances. As we stood outside the gray building that would determine our fate, we became bureaucracy buddies. We would fetch coffee for the group, and we made small talk in our broken Spanish, everybody with a different accent. Without fail, every trip to the immigration office meant someone saying, "But you're American, why should you have to do this? Can't you just live anywhere you want?" Even people from other countries adopt our Yankee exceptionalism. And did you ever notice that when white people move to another country, they're called expats, but when non-white people do it, they're called immigrants? Time passed. I made friends, I had relationships, I bought furniture, I got to know the city like the back of my hand. I held down multiple jobs in order to get by, bartending, babysitting, writing, editing, and teaching English. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was exciting. I took trains that crisscrossed Spain. I perfected the flip of my tortilla española. I was wholly devoted to my new country with the zeal of a religious convert. And then the luck and privilege ran out. The company that was sponsoring my visa was sold. On paper, it was like my visa sponsors had ceased to exist. I was, in an instant, illegally residing in Spain, where I had now lived and worked for 3 years. This is how it happens for the vast majority of the world's undocumented immigrants. Not with dramatic crimes or sneaky nighttime border crossings, as TV pundits would like you to believe, but with the stroke of a pen. It's not as exciting of a news story, but most immigrants simply get caught up in the gears of a broken, ineffective system of paperwork. I met with a lawyer, which is, again, a privilege. I had two options. I could return to the US for 6 months and then come back to Spain legally with a tourist visa, but that was only good for 90 days, and then I'd be right back where I started. Or I could wait it out and hope that a new company would be willing to sponsor my visa. So I chose the second option. I stayed. I wasn't afraid of hard work, and I had begun building a life and a career. I didn't want to stop now. But let's be clear, while I was young and broke, I wasn't fleeing war, terrorism, starvation, or religious persecution. Could I have just gone back to the US? Probably. My family would have welcomed me with open arms. It's an incredible advantage to have choices, and it's one not afforded to the majority of the world's immigrants. But people move to other countries seeking a better life, whatever that means to them. So finding a new visa sponsor became a daily, all-consuming activity. I went on interviews hoping they couldn't see my sweaty desperation, and I even got some job offers, including one from a news network. You might have heard of them. They produce the fake news. These were large, moneyed, international companies with whole departments of lawyers dedicated to handling red tape. They could help me out, right? But when it came time to reveal my visa status, every single one said they couldn't sponsor me. The economic crisis was starting to hit Spain hard, and job placements had to first be offered to legal European Union residents. If you sort out your visa, be sure to let us know, they would say cheerfully as I left the office with ever-tightening knots in my chest. So now for a short history lesson. From 1939 to 1975, Spain lived under the isolationist dictatorship of Generalissimo Francisco Franco. There was virtually no immigration into Spain during that time, which created a homogeneous nationalist society. And it stayed that way for a long time, even after Franco died. In 1998, immigrants made up just 3% of Spain's population. But by 2008, when I was living there undocumented, the share had jumped to 13%, which was one of the highest in Europe at the time. The global economic crash, combined with this new influx of foreign residents, brought with it some serious anti-immigrant sentiment. When times get tough, the easiest thing for people to do is to blame immigrants for stealing their jobs, even though this has been universally proven not to be the case. On the outside, my daily life was pretty normal. I went to work, where they paid me under the table. I went out with my friends. I had a bank account, a cell phone contract, and a monthly subway pass. I even paid some taxes. Undocumented immigrants usually pay plenty of taxes. When I got sick, I paid cash for the services of the outstanding national healthcare system. I'm here to tell you, socialized medicine is great. We should really get some. I got to live an okay life under the radar, other than people shouting at me occasionally that they hated George W. Bush. Meanwhile, all around me, I witnessed increased pressure on the non-white immigrants in Spain. There were random ID checks, primarily in the neighborhoods populated by Moroccans and sub-Saharan Africans. The news reported daily on deportation statistics, and police were given weekly quotas of undocumented immigrants to detain. Does any of this sound familiar? One day, I was nearly knocked down in the street by two policemen. They were chasing two panicked-looking African men who ran down the crowded sidewalk. The police breezed past me in a blur, me, an undocumented immigrant, in their pursuit to capture the other undocumented immigrants. I deserved to be deported just as much as those men did. We were likely breaking the immigration law in equal measure. I got to continue on my way, and they were hunted down. But again, this happens here in America too. Did you know there are over 500,000 undocumented European immigrants in the United States? For some reason, those ones are never mentioned. Don't get me wrong, Americans can and do get deported from other countries. A friend of mine from Boston, who had also overstayed her visa by several years, was caught at the Madrid airport. She wasn't allowed to go back to her apartment to gather her things or to say goodbye to her fiance. She was placed on the first plane back to Boston with a big black X in her passport, banned from not just Spain, but the entire European Union for 10 years. So while not everyone is chased down in the street or deported, here's the thing that's not often discussed when it comes to undocumented immigration. No one wants to live in the margins. The idea that undocumented immigrants are gleefully taking advantage of society's benefits is false. To be constantly looking over your shoulder to feel that the rug could be swept out from under you at any moment is exhausting. I, an undocumented immigrant with seemingly every advantage, was a bundle of nerves when I thought about the future. I loved my home, my work, and my friends, who had become my second family. The idea of being forced to leave kept me up at night. A gay friend offered to marry me for papers. It was a kind offer, but I said no. I wanted so desperately to do things on the up and up. My Spanish friends called me a sin papeles in jest. It was a joke because I was the right kind of immigrant. Get it? I'm not threatening, I'm educated. But the joke's on them. I had now been living undocumented in their country for over 5 years. I kept my head down and kept working, exploring every possible path towards legal residency. I didn't go back to the US because the risk of being caught upon reentry was too great. Because of my white skin and superpower country of origin, I was invisible. I was in legal purgatory. I wasn't legitimate enough to get citizenship, but I wasn't suspicious enough to be handcuffed and sent away. That limbo is exactly how so many of the world's undocumented immigrants live. Honest, hardworking people arrive very often legally at first, and with the best of intentions. But bureaucratic red tape, economic circumstances beyond their control, and thousands of other factors can keep them from becoming legal citizens. Obtaining legal residency can take years or even decades to attain. It's stifling, and for so many immigrants, it becomes a permanent way of life. When you're in this not quite legitimate fugue state, it's impossible to live up to your potential, to plan for the future, to fully participate in your community, and to be truly free. In the end, the strain of living undocumented was too much, and the opportunities were too few. I returned to the US in 2011, 7 years after I had optimistically set out. I miss Spain like it's a phantom limb, and I mourn for the life that I had started in my new country. But fortunately, technology and occasional visits keep me connected. I feel that strongly about a place where I just simply felt at home. I can't even fathom how I'd feel about staying in my adopted country if it meant shelter and safety for my child, or an escape from rape, war, famine, or certain death.